In We Should Be So Lucky, Andrew Lowe uncovers the real secret behind Australia's success. With sharp insight, he shows that the unusual prosperity and quality of life in Australia, often attributed to luck, actually derives from a unique blend of political, social and economic institutions and values that could be replicated by other liberal democracies.
So I guess I've always been interested in what makes Australia different. I came to Australia when I was 8 years old, having been born in Namibia. Went straight into Mount Isa, so right to the heart of the traditional kind of images of Australia, and then spent time in Sydney, and then in my adult life I've spent a lot of time living in Asia, Europe and North America. And what struck me particularly over the last sort of 10 or 20 years is that while there's a lot of affection for Australia, there's not a lot of real understanding of how our political institutions are different. The way we do healthcare is different, the way we do education, the way we do pensions and all those sorts of things. And I thought that not only do we do it differently, but actually there's a lot of evidence that we, in many cases, do it better. Australians live longer, we have a higher median level of wealth.
You talk about, as part of the Australian way, the framework of laws that the average person responds to here. You say it's a hybrid culture based on, Eurasian in lifestyle anchored in the norms of British settlement. Yeah. In a recent, and I want to talk about citizen education a little bit, I think. In a recent article in The Australian, Peter Credlin was talking about Australian values being at risk, saying poor citizen testing has led to a concept of Hotel Australia. People see Australia as a stopping point, but don't really buy in culturally to who we are. What do you think? And I think there's some truth in that, but it's unfair too. What's your sense of that, and what do we do about civics to help address that?
Yeah, so I think, as you say, there's a balance there, because overall we've actually been remarkably successful at having all the benefits of this very diverse, energetic population of people coming in from all parts of the world, but actually maintaining our social cohesion. Now, we've obviously seen that not everyone has bought into that, and then the question is, to the extent that there are minorities in the population who are not adopting those Australian values, are not understanding those Australian institutions, how do you stop that? And civic education, I suppose, is a part of that. But I think we need to be quite clear about what are the things that people must buy into. Peaceful resolution of disputes. You don't resort to violence. You don't do those sorts of things. But at the same time, we can actually live with quite a variety of different views on other things in a sort of tolerant society where everyone gets on with things.
Well, one of the things you talk about is the lessons that we learn from the Australian way, and you identify a few things I want to touch on. You talk about updating our democracy for the 21st century. You say the upper house has served us well, and I think that is true in the long run. I was reading again, Beach Energy CEO Brett Woods said the other day about energy policy. A minority government risks handing over exorbitant power to a collection of shuttered MPs, wholly concerned with their narrow agenda rather than the greater good of the nation. Tell me how you think our political system will serve us well in that environment, particularly given what we could face.
Yeah. Well, let's. First, go back to the big picture. Australia was, although we think of ourselves as quite a young democracy, in fact, there's only about a dozen countries that have been continuously democratic from 1901, when Australia had federation, to now. Notably, obviously, people like Japan and Germany went on a different course in the 1930s and so on. and we were actually one of the first places to have an almost universal franchise, to not have a property requirement that you had to be of a certain level of wealth to vote. We were the first to introduce the female franchise, 20 years ahead of the UK. On that, we have this mix of compulsory voting and preference voting in the lower house, which tends to drive the debate towards the centre. So it's less about let's get my team angry enough to get to the polls. Politicians have to go towards the middle. So I think all of that stuff works very well. I think the federal structure, for all its frustrations, does allow the country to be levelled up, is the phrase they use in the UK, in a way that other systems don't.
Indeed, and you talk about reform from the centre, particularly over the last 30 years, where we've had a succession of good Labor and Liberal governments who have led well from the centre.
Yep,
and I think that has discouraged that.
Particularly in the 80s and 90s, I think that was certainly true.
Do you think so? And you mentioned that we're one of 12 or so democracies that have operated stably. Do you think there's something? And you also mentioned in America there's a hunt for votes. Do you think our democracy, which was gifted to us, really? We had a colonial system, and we adopted this, and we didn't fight for it.
Yeah, so we definitely evolved. We obviously came to the Australian uniqueness through evolution rather than revolution. Yeah, and as you say, particularly somewhere like America, where people very much define themselves as against the government, and that really permeates the whole way that a lot of people think about government in the thing of having to take up arms against the suppressive regime. We've not had that. Yeah.
One of the other things you say is the quality of the institutions that we have. You mentioned those at the start. I agree with your point about the Productivity Commission. You say that there's a lot of good work done there that isn't published, recognised or understood. It's certainly the case in my industry. Yep. Do you want to talk a bit about productivity and what can be done to bring that forward?
Yeah, so I think that is a real challenge for Australia. Over the long term, your ability to become more prosperous and for people to enjoy the kind of quality life that we do comes to having a more productive economy. And in the 80s and 90s, we were growing productivity around 2%, then it sort of slipped back to 1%, and now it's kind of going backwards. And that is an issue. I think in a way, we've sort of become a victim of our own success because things are actually pretty good. There's not a lot of votes, there's not a lot of incentive or motivation to actually make hard decisions.
And one of the things I spoke about with a previous guest was the disconnect between our politicians' terms and long-term reform, and the kind of reforms we need are long-term reforms. They're difficult for governments to implement and talk to and sell.
Yeah. No, I think there is an element of that. We've moved now to 4-year terms in the state parliaments, and I think that having a 4-year fixed term federally would be a positive thing, as you say, for allowing political leaders to take longer term decisions.
I'm jumping around a bit as the book does, but one of the things you also talk about is Australia as a beneficiary of the global rule of order and Pax Americana. That's been a long 80-year journey. Yep. Now, are we seeing real change here, do you think? Do you think and you also talk about our diplomacy needing to be better resourced. I think that's true. We're seeing a slightly different new world order with a different government. We're seeing the emergence of sovereign individuals playing key roles. Yep. How do you think Australia should be responding, both diplomatically and otherwise, to those challenges?
Yeah. Yeah, no, look, I think it's going to require a lot more dexterity and a lot more focus than we've had in the past. That post-war system that America set up at a time when it was more than half of the world's GDP, 70% of the world's reserves, etc., has been great for Australia and has meant that we really haven't had to do as much thinking about individual relationships with different countries in the region. If we have a well-educated population, we're open to foreign investment, to bringing in the right sort of skills. If we have sort of flexibility and adaptability in what we do, then we're going to be successful across all of those things, Joe.
There's a great quote in your book here. Is Helmut Schmidt right? People with vision should see a doctor.
I think that gets to that Australian scepticism,
Yes.
and I think again it served us well. We if you contrast the UK, where they've swung from Corbynism to Liz Truss to all these things, and America obviously has this great polarization and so on. I think there's something very healthy about that Australian attitude of, well, hang on a minute, let's just think this through.
Your book says safety first. Focus has a flip side. Innovations are slow to get to market. Boards spend more time on risk than other countries. I know that. New innovation is seen through the prism of what can go wrong rather than what can go right. And you kindly reminded us of that great Barry Humphries quote: "To live permanently in Australia is rather like going to a party and dancing all night with your mother."
Yeah, no, and I think fortunately we do have the fortune that most Australians are able to travel, whether it's to Bali or Thailand or further afield, and that and the fact that a lot of Australians go overseas during their careers, I think reflects that as well.
And that requires leaders to actually be bought into our success, proper leaders to be bought into our success and manage from the future, from the centre.
Yes. No, I think that's right. And so, I think if you look at what China is doing, for example, is they are saying, okay, when it comes to energy, all of the above, So we're going to build massive numbers of solar panels. We're going to invest in nuclear power plants, but at the same time, we're not going to just shut down our existing energy because it's important for any country to have cheap and reliable sources of energy. So overall, I'm optimistic, Joe. In spite of those R&D statistics not being as strong as we'd like, I think there is the entrepreneurialism there, and if we can actually harness some of that innovation coming out of universities and actually apply it to companies, then I think we're actually very well positioned.
Yeah, and I think you talk about sharpening the saw a bit around those issues. If we get education right, some of those linkages right, we actually do have a great future.
Yeah. No, I think that's a general point that the good thing that emerges as you look into these things and you research the areas where we have gone a bit off track is that they're all fixable. They just need us to break out of that complacency that says we're kind of fine, and just say, well, we are fine, and objectively, we do enjoy a better quality of life and standard of living than almost anywhere.